In the late spring of 1986, in a quiet farm county in eastern Marisburg, two foster sisters walked out of a county placement home and were never seen again. There was no forced door, no struggle, no ransom, no note. Police searched the fields, dragged the reservoir, and questioned everyone in the town of Holland Creek. They found nothing. The case quickly went cold, and the two girls became just two more names on a list nobody read anymore. 31 years later, one small detail, a number that would not add up on a decommissioned government spreadsheet, reopened everything. And what it revealed was a truth no one was prepared for. Not a rescue, not a reunion. Something colder, and in its own way, worse. If stories like this matter to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling the cases that never made the news. Now, let's get into today's case. To understand what happened, you have to understand the two girls first, because for 31 years, almost nobody bothered to. Their names were Dana and Ruth Averill. Dana was 12. Ruth had just turned 9. They were sisters by blood, which mattered, because the system that took them in did not always keep siblings together. And someone had fought to keep these two in the same house. That someone was their older foster brother, a boy named Wesley Coyne. Wesley was 17 in 1986. He was not their brother by blood or by adoption. He was simply another kid who had landed in the same placement home, the Purcell home on Route 9, a long, low farmhouse with a sagging porch, and a wood stove that never fully warmed the back bedrooms. Wesley had been in the system since he was 6. He had learned early that the only thing you could count on was the thing you decided to count on yourself. And somewhere in the 2 years he lived under that sagging roof, he decided to count on Donna and Ruth. He remembered the day they arrived. It was raining, a thin, cold rain that turned the yard to soup. Dana came up the steps first with her chin out, daring the world to try something. Ruth came behind her, small and silent, holding a plastic grocery bag with everything she owned in it. Wesley remembered thinking that the little one looked like she was made of glass. He was wrong about that. Ruth was tougher than she looked. But the image stuck with him for the rest of his life. Dana was loud, quick-tempered, and fiercely funny. She could do a dead-on impression of Mrs. Purcell's phone voice, all sugar and vinegar, and she saved it for the nights when Ruth couldn't sleep. Ruth was the opposite watchful, careful, the kind of child who counted the forks when she set the table because she liked knowing that the number was right. She kept a spiral notebook where she wrote down small facts about her days. The weather, what they ate, how many trucks passed on Route 9. She said it was so she wouldn't forget, though she never explained forget what. Wesley loved them the way older kids in the system sometimes loved the younger ones, with a protectiveness that had nowhere else to go. He walked them to the school bus. He taught Dana how to throw a punch and taught Ruth how to fix a bicycle chain. When the Purcell's own grown son came around and got mean after drinking, Wesley learned the sound of that particular truck engine and learned to have the girls out in the barn before it reached the driveway. There were rituals between the three of them, small and private, the kind that hold a makeshift family together when nothing official does. On Sunday nights, if there was any money at all, Wesley bought a single candy bar from the gas station on the corner of Route 9 and the county road, and the three of them split it into 3 uneven pieces on the barn floor. And Ruth always got the biggest piece, because Dana said the little one needed feeding up. Dana kept a running list of everyone who had ever been unfair to them, and swore that one day, when she was grown and rich, she'd come back and settle every score. Wesley used to tell her the list was going to get too long to carry. Dana said she'd buy a bigger truck, Ruth had a habit that Wesley thought about for the rest of his life. Every night, before she wrote in her notebook, she would touch 3 things in the room: the windowsill, the bedpost, the corner of Dana's blanket, or in the same order, like she was making sure the world was still where she'd left it. She never explained it, and no one ever asked. It was just a thing Ruth did. A small, private accounting of a life that had taught her that things disappeared if you didn't keep track of them. She was right about that, too. She just didn't know how right. Life in the Purcell home was not picture perfect. Money was thin, and kindness was thinner. And there were nights the wood stove lost its fight with the cold, and the 3 of them slept in the same bed for warmth, with their coats still on. But the 3 of them together, that came close, that was the closest thing to a family any of them had. And then, in May of 1986, the girls were gone. It started with small things. It always does. The first small thing was the notebook. Ruth's spiral notebook, the one she guarded like treasure, turned up on the kitchen table the morning of May 14th, left open, its last page half filled. That was wrong. Ruth never left it out. She kept it under her mattress, and she wrote in it at night. To Wesley, seeing it lying open on the table in the gray morning light was like seeing a bird's nest fall out of a tree with the eggs still in it. The second small thing was the shoes. Dana had exactly 1 good pair of shoes, white canvas sneakers she'd earned by weeding the Purcell's garden all through April. They were sitting by the door, side by side, laces tucked in. Dana would not have left those. Not for anything. Something felt wrong, really wrong. He'd gone to their room first, the way he did every morning to walk them to the bus. The door was ajar. The bed was made, which was wrong, because Dana never made her bed, considered it a small daily act of rebellion against Mrs. Purcell. The blanket was pulled tight and square, the corners tucked the way an adult tucks them. On the pillow, side by side, were the 2 things the girls loved most. Dana's transistor radio, the one she'd traded 3 weeks of chores for, and a folded paper crane that Ruth had made from a page torn out of a magazine. Just sitting there, left behind. Kids running to the creek don't leave their radio. Kids running away don't fold a paper crane and set it on the pillow like an offering. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. And it was the kind of wrong that gets into your chest and sits there. Wesley told Mrs. Purcell the girls weren't in their room. She said they'd probably gone off to the creek and would turn up by supper. She said it without looking up from the stove. Wesley remembered that too, how she didn't look up, how her hand kept stirring the same pot in the same slow circle, like the morning was any other morning. He remembered the smell of it, some gray oatmeal thing, and how his stomach turned at it, and how for years afterward he couldn't eat oatmeal without seeing her back, and that slow, stirring hand. He asked her about the surprise Ruth had written down. Mrs. Purcell's hand stopped for just a second, just one beat, one skipped stir, and then it started again. And she said she didn't know what he was talking about, and that he should get to school and stop telling stories. He never forgot that skipped beat. 31 years later, he would finally understand what it meant. By supper, the girls had not turned up. By dark, the county sheriff had been called. By midnight, there were flashlights bobbing across the back fields like slow lightning bugs. And Wesley was standing on the porch in the cold with Ruth's open notebook in his hands, reading the last thing she had written over and over. It said, Thursday. Rain stopped. Mrs. P said we are getting a surprise. Dana says don't trust surprises. 14 trucks today. A surprise. Wesley turned that word over and over. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. The detective assigned to the case was a man named Harold Boone. He was 51, heavy-set, with a smoker's cough and a way of standing at the edge of a room like he was already thinking about leaving it. He had worked missing kids before. He knew the numbers. He knew that most children who vanish are taken by someone they know, and that most of the ones who aren't found in the first 3 days are not found at all. Boone did everything he was supposed to do. K-9 units came out from the state and worked the fields, the barn, the creek bank. The dogs picked up the girl's scent at the house and followed it out to the gravel shoulder of Route 9. And there it stopped. Just stopped. At the edge of the road. Like the girls had stepped off the planet. That was the baffling clue. The scent trail ended at the road. Not at a car door you could measure, not at a specific spot. Just a general fading out along 50 feet of gravel, as if 2 children had walked to the roadside and dissolved. To Boone, that meant a vehicle. Someone had picked them up. Someone the dogs couldn't track because rubber and gasoline don't hold a scent the way a body does. They dragged the reservoir. Boone stood on the bank in a borrowed rain slicker and watched the grappling hooks come up empty, load after load. Mud and weeds and a rusted bicycle frame and a waterlogged boot that turned out to belong to no one. He watched for 2 days. Each time a hook broke the surface, he felt something in his chest lift and then drop, until he couldn't feel it anymore at all. They searched abandoned barns. They walked the tree lines with volunteers, 100 people in a ragged line, arms out, calling the girls' names into the wind until their voices gave out. They ran down every registered vehicle in the county and half the ones in the next county over, chasing the theory that a car had taken the girls from the roadside. They questioned the Purcell's grown son, the mean one with a loud truck, the one Wesley had learned to fear by the sound of his engine. And he had an alibi. He'd been 90 miles away at a job site. And a foreman swore to it. And the time card backed it up. They pulled the Kestrel agency into it too, the way you do asked for the girls' files, their case histories, their placement paperwork. Kestrel sent a thin folder and a polite letter from a regional office. Nobody at the sheriff's department was trained to audit a foster agency's books, and nobody thought to. Kestrel was an institution. Institutions were the thing you called when a child was in trouble, not the thing you suspected. The folder sat in Boone's box, and the answer to everything sat inside a filing system, 60 miles away, that no one would open for 31 years. They questioned Wesley, too. Hard, for hours. Because a 17-year-old foster kid who loved the missing girls was exactly the kind of person the numbers pointed to. Boone sat across a metal table from him and asked the same questions 6 different ways. Wesley answered all of them the same way. I would cut off my own hand before I'd hurt them. Find them. Please just find them. Boone believed him. He couldn't have said why, but he did. The problem was, believing Wesley didn't produce a single lead. Weeks turned into months. The flyers faded in shop windows. The state closed its active file and moved the case to the back drawer where the cold ones went. And Harold Boone, who genuinely tried, went home one night and told his wife that in 30 years he had never had a case go so completely quiet, so completely fast. 2 girls, he said. 2 whole girls, and it's like the county just closed over them. He didn't know how right he was, not the way he meant it, but close. 31 years is a long time to carry something. Wesley aged out of the system that fall on his 18th birthday, handed a garbage bag of his belongings and a bus token, and pointed at the door. He got a job at a grain elevator, then at a machine shop. Then he drove a delivery route for a regional bakery for 19 years. He was good at the route. He liked the early hours, the empty roads, the way the towns woke up around him as he drove. What he liked most, though he never told anyone, was that the route took him down Route 9 twice a week, past the turnoff to the old Purcell place. And every time he passed it, he slowed down and looked just for a second in case. In case of what, he could never have said. In case the girls were standing at the roadside where the dogs had lost their scent. In case the last 30 years had been a mistake he could still undo. He knew it was foolish. He slowed down anyway, twice a week, for 19 years. He married a patient woman named Carol, who understood without ever fully understanding that a part of her husband lived permanently in the spring of 1986. She learned the anniversary without being told, learned to recognize the second week of May by the way Wesley went quiet, by the way he'd sit on the porch after dark and count the trucks that passed on the road. She never asked him to stop. She'd just bring him a coffee and sit with him. And sometimes he'd say a name, Dana or Ruth, out into the dark. And Carol would say it back to him softly, so he'd know he wasn't the only one carrying it. He never had children of his own. When Carol asked him once, gently, why, he said he'd already been a father once, to 2 girls, and he'd failed at it, and he didn't think he'd earned another try. Carol told him it wasn't his fault. He said he knew that. He said it the way people say things they know in their heads and have never once believed in their hearts. Mrs. Purcell died in 1994. The Purcell home was sold, gutted, and turned into a hunting rental. The grown son, the mean one, drank himself into the ground by 2001. Detective Harold Boone retired, then died of a stroke in 2009 with the Averill file, still by his own request, in a box in his garage. His widow eventually donated the box to the County Historical Society, where it sat unopened for years. The county itself changed. Farms consolidated. The old placement system was folded into a regional agency, then folded again, then finally absorbed into the state's centralized child welfare department in a long, slow, bureaucratic tide. Paper files were boxed, warehoused, and starting in the 2010s slowly, unevenly digitized by contractors paid by the record. And through all of it, Wesley kept Ruth's notebook. He kept it in a drawer in his bedside table, wrapped in a plastic bag, the same kind of plastic bag Ruth had carried her whole life in on the day she arrived. Every few years he'd take it out and read the last page. 14 trucks today. He'd count the trucks on Route 9 in his head, the way she used to, and he'd feel his throat close. He never stopped believing that the 2 girls were out there somewhere, or that at the very least the truth of what happened to them was out there, waiting, patient the way truth is. He was right about the second part. He was wrong about the first, though he would not learn how wrong until he was almost 60 years old. The detail that reopened everything did not come from a birthmark in a vacation photo, or a face in the background of a stranger's picture, or a voice on a phone in the middle of the night. It came from a spreadsheet. Her name was Priya Anand. She was 34, a data reconciliation analyst for the State Child Welfare Department. And in the winter of 2017, she was given one of the least glamorous jobs in state government. Close out the financial records of a defunct private foster agency called Kestrel Family Services, which had operated in the eastern counties from 1979 to 1991 before going bankrupt and dissolving. Priya's job was not to find missing children. Priya's job was to make the money balance. Kestrel's old records were finally being digitized, decades late, and before they could be sealed and archived, someone had to reconcile the reimbursement claims, the payments the state and county had made to Kestrel for each child in its care, against the placement records that were supposed to justify every dollar. It was tedious Thankless, invisible work, the kind of work that happens in the basement of government, years after everyone who cared about the subject has died or moved on. Kestrel had billed the government a per-child stipend for every foster child it placed. Each child was supposed to correspond to a real placement, a real case number, a real name. Priya's task was simply to confirm that the number of children billed for matched the number of children placed, home by home, month by month, across 12 years of a dead agency's paperwork. Priya was good at this in a way most people found strange. She had a temperament suited to it, a deep, almost physical discomfort with a number that didn't resolve. Her colleagues teased her about it. She'd stay an hour late over a $9 discrepancy, not because the $9 mattered, but because the not knowing itched at her like a splinter under a nail. She believed, without ever putting it into words, that every number stood for something real in the world, and that a number that didn't add up meant something real in the world was unaccounted for. Usually it was a typo. Sometimes it was fraud. She had never once, in 11 years of the job, imagined it could be 2 dead children. For most of Kestrel's caseload, the numbers matched. Home after home, month after month, the children billed for and the children placed lined up like they were supposed to. It was slow, hypnotic work, and Priya fell into the rhythm of it. Then she got to the Purcell home on Route 9. For the years 1985 and 1986, the Purcell placement records listed the children in that home: Wesley Coyne, Dana Averill, Ruth Averill, and a rotating handful of others over the months. But the reimbursement claims the money side billed for one more child than the placement side listed, for 11 months, from August 1985 through June 1986. Kestrel had collected a monthly stipend for a 4th child in the Purcell home. A girl, the name on the reimbursement claim was Ada Averill. Ada, a 3rd Averill sister. Priya frowned at her screen. A 3rd sister was not, by itself, alarming. Records from the 80s were messy. Siblings got split and reunited. A child could have been placed and then quickly moved. Maybe the placement paperwork for Ada had simply been lost. So she went looking for Ada Averill. And that is where it got strange, because Ada Averill was not in the placement records. Dana was there, and Ruth and Wesley Coyne, and the others who had cycled through, but no Ada. Priya assumed a filing error and widened her search. She checked the school enrollment records for Holland Creek Elementary. Dana Averill, grade 6. Ruth Averill, grade 3. No Ada. She checked the county immunization registry, which had been digitized from index cards years earlier. Dana and Ruth both had entries. Dated shots, the ordinary medical footprint of ordinary children. No Ada. She checked the medical services billing that Kestrel itself had submitted for its children's doctor visits, a strep test for Ruth in the winter of 1985, a sprained wrist for Dana, a dental cleaning for Wesley. Every real child in that house had left a trail of small human evidence. A fever, a checkup, a form signed by a nurse. Ada had left nothing. No school, no shots, no doctor, no photograph in any file. No signature, no fingerprint, no report card, no note from a teacher. A child who was 9 years old, supposedly for 11 months, and who had never once been sick, never once been to school, never once been seen by a single person whose job it was to see children. Ada Averill existed in exactly one place, on the checks. Priya widened the search one more time, almost desperate now to find the girl somewhere, anywhere, to make the boring explanation true. She searched adjacent counties in case Ada had been schooled elsewhere. She searched later years in case Ada had aged into some other record. She searched death indexes in case the reason there was no footprint was the saddest, ordinary reason of all. Nothing. Everywhere a real child leaves marks on the world, Ada Averill left none. She was a name and a number and a monthly payment, and beneath those three things, there was simply no one there. Something felt wrong, really wrong. And Priya Anand, who had never heard of the Averill case, who was not looking for a mystery, who only wanted her spreadsheet to balance, sat very still in her cubicle, and felt the first cold touch of a thing she couldn't yet name. Priya's first instinct was the boring, correct one. It was probably a clerical error, a duplicate, a ghost entry created when some clerk fat-fingered a form in 1985 and it echoed through the billing system for 11 months before someone caught it. But 11 months is a long echo. And the amounts were consistent, deliberate, paid out on schedule like clockwork. This did not look like a typo. This looked like a decision. She pulled the actual reimbursement claim forms, now scanned into the system. Each month's claim for the Purcell home listed the children by name and case number and carried an authorizing signature. Ada Averill had a case number, a real, formatted, valid-looking case number. And every month, the claim was signed by the same person, a Kestrel regional administrator named Garrett Vane. Priya looked up Garrett Vane. He had been Kestrel's Eastern Region Director. He had authorized placements, signed reimbursement claims, and controlled the flow of money between the county, the state, and the agency for the entire Eastern District. If anyone knew whether Ada Averill was a real child, it was Garrett Vane. Garrett Vane had died in 2003. Of course he had. Everyone in this story died before you could ask them anything. That was the thing Priya would come to hate most about it. She kept pulling threads. The case number assigned to Ada Averill, she ran it against the master index. And here was the next wrong thing. The case number was real, but it had been derived. It was Dana Averill's case number with 2 digits transposed. Ada's file number was a mirror of Donna's, warped just enough to look independent to anyone who wasn't checking, and just similar enough that anyone who was checking might assume a data entry slip. A person built out of another person's number, a sister assembled from a transposition. Priya's hands were cold on the keyboard. She was a records analyst. She was not supposed to be the one who found things like this, but she was the one at the desk. So she kept going. The next step was the one that changed everything, and she almost didn't take it. Because once she'd established that Ada Averill probably wasn't real, that she was, in all likelihood, a phantom child invented to skim an extra stipend for 11 months, Priya's official job was essentially done. She could flag the discrepancy, note the probable fraud, mark the beneficiary deceased and unprosecutable, and close the file. Case balanced. Money accounted for. Move on to the next agency. But there was a note in the digitized case index, a small one, a cross-reference flag that some earlier contractor had entered years before, linking the Purcell home file to a law enforcement records request. Priya clicked it. It opened to a scanned intake summary from 1986. A missing persons report. 2 children. Dana Averill, age 12. Ruth Averill, age 9. Vanished from the Purcell home, Route 9, Holland Creek. Case cold. And Priya Anand understood all at once that she was not looking at a boring embezzlement. She was looking at the paperwork of a place where 2 real children had disappeared and a third, fake child had kept being paid for a full month after the 2 real ones were already gone. Because the stipend for Ada Averill didn't stop in May of 1986, when Dana and Ruth vanished. It ran through June. Ada was billed for and paid for after the real girls were already the subject of a search that combed every field in the county. His blood would have run cold if Wesley had known. But Wesley didn't know yet. Only Priya knew, alone at a desk after hours, staring at a girl who had never lived and never died. A girl made entirely of money, standing like a paper scarecrow over the empty place where two real sisters used to be. The next morning, Priya did something that was not, strictly, her job. She requested the full physical case box, Kestrel's original paper file for the Purcell home, pulled from the state warehouse. It took 9 days to arrive. When it did, she took her lunch breaks in a windowless records room and went through it page by page. The paper told a story the spreadsheet only hinted at. Kestrel Family Services had been, on paper, a respected agency. But the eastern region under Garrett Vane had a pattern, once you knew to look for it. Vane's district consistently billed for slightly more children than it placed, not wildly more. Never enough to trip an audit. A phantom here, a ghost there, each one a few $100s a month, each one riding on a real family's paperwork so that it never stood entirely alone. Ada Averill was one of several. Priya found at least 4 other invented children across Vane's district in the 80s. Each one built the same way a real sibling's case number, transposed. A plausible name. Billing, but no schooling, no medicine, no shots, no photographs, no footprint of a living child. Vane had been quietly manufacturing children out of the paperwork of real ones and pocketing the difference for years. It was a petty crime in the scheme of things. Not a monster's crime, a bookkeeper's crime. A man skimming a system that no one was watching closely enough to catch. But here is the thing Priya could not stop turning over, the same way Wesley had spent 30 years turning over the word surprise. Ada Averill was invented in August 1985. Dana and Ruth Averill disappeared in May 1986. And when they disappeared, when the dogs lost the scent at the roadside and the reservoir came up empty, and Harold Boone stood in his kitchen and told his wife it was like the county had closed over them. The paperwork that should have screamed, 2 children are missing, was quietly, partially absorbed by the paperwork of a 3rd child who had never existed at all. Because Kestrel's own internal records, the ones that fed the county's understanding of who was in the Purcell home, were a mess of Vane's making. The count was already wrong. The home was already billing for a child who wasn't there. So when 2 children who were there suddenly weren't, the discrepancy didn't stand out the way it should have. The books were already lying. 2 more absences just got lost in the noise of the lies already on the page. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. And yet, it made a terrible kind of sense. The sense that only money makes. Priya knew she had to tell someone connected to the girls, not a bureaucrat, a person. It took her 3 weeks of quiet, unofficial searching to find Wesley Coyne. His name was in the old file as the foster brother, the one questioned for hours, the one Boone had believed. She found a current address through a driver's license cross-match she probably wasn't supposed to run. He was 58 now, living in a small house 40 miles from Holland Creek, retired from his bakery route, married to a woman named Carol. She wrote him a letter first. She didn't trust herself to do it by phone. She wrote that she worked for the state, that she'd been reviewing old foster agency records, and that she had found something concerning, connected to Dana and Ruth Averill, and that she would like to speak with him if he was willing. Wesley called her the day the letter arrived. His voice on the phone was low and careful, the voice of a man who had learned not to let himself hope, because hope had a way of walking out to the edge of a gravel road and vanishing. "You found them," he said. It wasn't a question. It was 31 years of a question finally allowed out of its cage. Priya closed her eyes. "No," she said. "I'm sorry, I didn't find them. But I found something, and I think it's part of what happened to them. Can I come to you?" There was a long silence on the line. "There's 3 of them now, isn't there?" Wesley said suddenly. "In your papers, there's 3. Priya's skin prickled. "How did you know that?" "Because Ruth's last note said Mrs. Purcell promised a surprise," Wesley said. "And I've spent 31 years wondering what the surprise was. Come, please, come and tell me." They met at his kitchen table on a Saturday in early spring, 31 years almost to the season since the girls had gone. Carol made coffee and then left them alone. Wesley had Ruth's notebook on the table, still in its plastic bag. Priya had a folder. She explained it slowly, gently, the way you set something heavy down so it doesn't break the floor. The phantom child, the invented case number, the 11 months of payments, Garrett Vane, the pattern across the district, and the terrible timing Ada billed through June, a month after the real girls were gone. Wesley listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing she had been dreading, the thing she had no answer for. "So there was never a third sister?" "No," Priya said. "I don't believe there was. I believe Ada was never a real girl. I believe she was invented to steal money." Wesley looked down at Ruth's notebook. His hands were shaking very slightly. "For 31 years, he said, there was a piece of me that thought if the paperwork was wrong, if there was a whole extra girl nobody knew about, then maybe the whole story was wrong. Maybe they were alive somewhere. Maybe the confusion meant there was room for them to be alive." He swallowed. "And you're telling me the confusion wasn't a door? It was just a man stealing money? It didn't mean anything. It didn't mean they were alive. It just meant the books were dirty." Priya didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be a lie, and she'd spent months living inside enough lies. "The surprise," Wesley whispered. "Ruth wrote that Mrs. Purcell promised them a surprise. Dana said don't trust surprises." He pressed his knuckles to his mouth. "What was the surprise? If there is no third sister, what did they promise those girls?" And Priya realized that she had answered the wrong question. She had spent months proving that Ada Averill did not exist. But the question that mattered, the question Wesley had been asking for 31 years, the question the whole county had failed, was not who is the third sister. It was what happened to the 2 who were real. The phantom had swallowed that question for 3 decades. Now the phantom was gone, and underneath it, the real hole was still there, exactly as deep as it had always been. Here is where the case turned, and it turned on the smallest thing of all: a duplicate endorsement on the back of a check. Priya went back to the reimbursement records with a different question. She had been trying to prove Ada wasn't real. Now she wanted to know how the money for Ada moved, because Vane didn't just invent children. He had to cash the stipends. And cashed checks leave trails. Money, unlike children, is almost impossible to make truly disappear. It moves through banks, through depository windows, through ledgers that log the date and the window and the teller and the deposit slip number. A phantom child leaves no footprint. But the phantom's money leaves a very real one. And Priya had spent 11 years learning to read exactly that kind of footprint. The state had, decades late, digitized not just the front of the old reimbursement checks, but for a subset of years, the backs, the endorsements. It was one of those accidents of bureaucracy. A contractor paid to scan documents had scanned both sides because it was faster than sorting which side mattered. And so the backs of 30-year-old checks sat in a database that no one had ever had a reason to look at. Priya had a reason. Ada Averill's June 1986 stipend, the last one, the one paid a month after the real girls vanished, had been endorsed and deposited. And on the back of that check, beneath Vane's authorizing stamp, was a second endorsement, a transfer notation. The funds had been moved on the same day through the same county depository window as another Kestrel transaction. A placement transfer disbursement. A placement transfer. Money paid when a child was moved from one placement to another. Priya pulled the matching placement transfer record. It was dated May 13th, 1986, the day before Ruth's notebook turned up open on the kitchen table. It authorized the transfer of 2 children out of the Purcell home to another Kestrel facility, a group intake center 60 miles south, near the county line. The 2 children were listed only by case number. Priya's hands went cold. She ran the numbers. They were Dana's and Ruth's. For a moment, Priya let herself believe the hopeful version. A transfer. The girls hadn't vanished at all. They'd been moved, legitimately. And the paperwork had just never made it into the missing persons file. They'd grown up somewhere else. They were alive. But she'd been fooled by paperwork before in this case, and she didn't intend to be fooled again. So she checked whether the transfer had ever actually happened. The receiving facility, the group intake center 60 miles south, had its own records, also now digitized. Priya requested them. She looked for any sign that Dana and Ruth Averill or their case numbers had ever arrived. Intake logs, bed assignments, meal counts, the immunization updates that any receiving facility would have generated. Nothing. The 2 girls were transferred out of the Purcell home on paper on May 13th. They never arrived anywhere. The transfer disbursement was cashed. The children evaporated. And now Priya understood the whole shape of it, the way you suddenly see the whole picture in one of those trick drawings. Garrett Vane hadn't only invented children to steal money. When 2 real children in his district disappeared under circumstances, he apparently understood circumstances the file never named, circumstances involving that farmhouse and its rotating cast of adults. Vane had done what a bookkeeper does. He had made the paperwork absorb the problem. He filed a transfer that never happened, so that on Kestrel's books, the girls were accounted for. Gone, but gone legitimately. Transferred to another facility, no longer his region's concern. And he collected the transfer disbursement on the way out, because a man like that never let a tragedy pass without billing for it. The missing persons investigation and the foster agency paperwork had never been cross-checked. Boone was chasing 2 vanished girls. Kestrel's books said those same girls had been calmly transferred 60 miles south. 2 systems, sitting side by side, each holding half the truth, never once compared for 31 years. The phantom sister, Ada, had been the thing that finally forced the comparison. If Vane had never invented her, Priya would never have pulled the Purcell file, never found the transfer, never checked the receiving facility. A crime he committed to steal a few $100s a month was the loose thread that, 3 decades later, unraveled the far worse thing hiding underneath it. There was never a 3rd sister. But the fiction of the 3rd sister was the only reason anyone ever came looking for the first 2. The paperwork could prove that Dana and Ruth were transferred nowhere. It could prove they had been erased from the system on May 13th, 1986. But paper could not say where their bodies were. For that, someone had to look at the ground. Priya brought the reconciled file, the phantom, the transposed case number, the fraudulent transfer, the empty receiving facility to the State Police Cold Case Unit. She brought it to a young investigator named Marcus Okafor, who had the rare quality of taking a spreadsheet as seriously as a bloodstain. Okafor read it twice. Then he did the thing that no one in 1986 had the tools to do. He took the fraudulent transfer date, May 13th, and the geography of the phantom transfer 60 miles south, toward the county line, and he treated them not as facts, but as a story someone had told to hide a body. If you were an adult connected to that farmhouse and you needed a reason to be traveling south with 2 children who would never be seen again, a fake transfer order to a facility 60 miles south was the perfect cover. It gave you a route, it gave you a reason, and it gave you a paper trail that pointed anywhere but home. Okafor pulled the Purcell property records, and the records of every parcel Kestrel and its administrators had touched along that southern route. And he found one. A small parcel, 10 acres of scrub and drainage ditch near the county line, that Garrett Vane had personally owned from 1982 to 1990. A place a Kestrel administrator could go without a single question being asked. A place directly on the phantom route south. In the autumn of 2017, 31 years after 2 girls walked out of a farmhouse and into a hole in the paperwork. A cadaver dog and a ground-penetrating radar unit worked that 10 acres of scrub for 4 days. Wesley asked to be there. Okafor said he couldn't be on the site itself, but didn't stop him from parking at the edge of the property, at the end of the dirt access road, where he could see the tent and the small figures moving across the field. Carol drove him. He sat on the tailgate of the truck for 4 days, with a thermos of coffee going cold beside him, watching. It was autumn, and the scrub had gone gold and brown, and the wind moved across the 10 acres in long, slow waves. And Wesley thought about how the girls had been under that ordinary field the whole time, under that ordinary wind, while he drove past the Route 9 turnoff twice a week for 19 years, looking for them 60 miles north of where they were. On the first day, nothing. On the second, the radar flagged a disturbance near the old drainage ditch, and the pace of the small figures changed, and Wesley felt it change from all the way across the field. On the third day, they brought in screens and fine brushes and worked on their knees. On the fourth day, near the old drainage ditch, they found them. 2 sets of small remains, buried together, side by side. Close together, Okafor would tell Wesley later, gently as such a thing can be said, the smaller one's arm across the larger one, or the larger one's across the smaller, 31 years having made it impossible to say which. Together, though. Whatever else had happened, they had not been alone. After 31 years, dental and DNA confirmation took weeks. But everyone at that ditch already knew. The way you know things you wish you didn't. It was Dana. It was Ruth. They had been together the whole time, 60 miles south of home, under a field owned by the man who had invented their fake sister and filed their fake transfer, and cashed the check on the way out. When Okafor walked across the field to the access road on the 4th evening to tell Wesley they'd found 2 children, Wesley didn't cry, not then. He just nodded, slowly, like a man having something confirmed that he'd known for 31 years. Then he said, "Was it both of them?" And Okafor said yes, both. And Wesley said, "Good, good. They'd have hated to be apart." And then he cried, with Carol's arms around him and the gold field going dark behind them. There was no confession. Garrett Vane had been dead for 14 years. There was no letter reframing the disappearance as an act of love, because it had not been an act of love. There was no survivor to reunite with, because there was no survivor. This is the part of the story that does not soften, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. What the investigation could establish, from the paperwork in the ground and the long-buried Boone file, was this. In the spring of 1986, something happened at the Purcell home involving the two girls. The file was never able to name exactly what or exactly who among the adults in that house was directly responsible, because too many of them were dead and too much time had passed. But Garrett Vane learned of it, and Vane, who saw children as line items, made a decision. He did not report it. He did not protect them. He processed it. He filed a transfer that turned 2 dead children into 2 administratively relocated ones, moved them south to his own land, and let the county's grief run in one direction while his paperwork ran in another. He protected the agency, the stipends, and himself. The girls became a bookkeeping entry, and then they became a hole in a field. The phantom sister, Ada, had been part of the same cold arithmetic, a habit of turning children into numbers that Vane had practiced for years before he ever needed to make 2 real children disappear. He was so used to inventing children who didn't exist that when he needed to unexist 2 who did, he already knew exactly how. Detective Harold Boone had been right all those years ago, in the only way he'd let himself say it out loud. It was like the county just closed over them. It had. Not with earth first, with paper. The earth came second. The state did what the state could do, which was not enough and was still something. Garrett Vane could not be prosecuted, but he could be named. The final reconciliation report and the cold case findings that grew out of it entered the public record with his name on every fraudulent line. Kestrel Family Services, long dissolved, was formally identified as the vehicle of a years-long stipend fraud and of the concealment of Dana and Ruth Averill's deaths. The state opened a review of every phantom child Vane had ever invented, and of every transfer his district had ever filed. Because if he had done this once, the question that kept the review board awake was how many other holes in how many other fields were still waiting under how many other fake transfers. Ada Averill was formally struck from the record, a person uncreated, 32 years after she was invented. It is a strange thing to hold a document that erases a child who never lived. Priya kept a copy. She said later that of everything in the case, that was the page that unsettled her most. The official act of proving that a sister had never been anything but money. Dana and Ruth Averill were issued death certificates dated to 1986, correcting a record that had listed them, absurdly, as transferred and closed. Their cases were reclassified from missing to homicide, and they were at last taken out of the ground near the drainage ditch and given a real burial, together in a cemetery in Holland Creek, under one stone with both their names on it and no third name beside them. Wesley paid for the stone. He had been saving, without ever admitting to himself what he was saving for 31 years. There is no reunion in this story. That is the truth of it. And the people who vanished do not always come home, no matter how much they were loved. But there was a burial, and Wesley Coyne stood at it, 58 years old, holding Ruth's spiral notebook in its plastic bag, with Carol's hand in his and Priya Anand standing a respectful distance back. And he read the last page out loud one final time so the 2 girls could hear that someone had kept it. Thursday. Rain stopped. Mrs. P said we were getting a surprise. Dana says don't trust surprises. 14 trucks today. He closed the notebook. You were right, Dana, he said. You were right not to trust it. Then he did something Priya never forgot. He knelt and set the notebook down against the base of the stone. He had kept it safe for 31 years, the way Ruth kept everything safe, counting and recording so that nothing would be forgotten. Now he gave it back to her. You wanted to remember, he said quietly. I remembered for you, both of you. The whole time, I never stopped. Carol had to help him back to his feet. We tell ourselves that when someone vanishes, the danger is that they'll be forgotten. That the enemy is silence and time and the way the world moves on. And that's part of it. But this case teaches something harder. Donna and Ruth Averill were not forgotten. Wesley never forgot them. What happened to them was that they were counted wrong. They were turned into paperwork by a man who had stopped seeing children as children. And the paperwork was so ordinary, so bureaucratic, so quietly plausible, that for 31 years, no one thought to check it against the ground. A phantom sister who never lived was tracked more carefully by the money than two real girls were tracked by the people paid to protect them. That is the thing that should keep us up at night. Not that the truth was hidden in some clever, elaborate way, but that it was hidden in plain arithmetic. In a spreadsheet nobody read. In a transfer nobody confirmed. In the space between two filing systems that never once spoke to each other. It took a stranger at a desk, doing the most boring job in the building, refusing to let one number go unexplained, to finally make those two systems speak. Priya Anand was not looking for Dana and Ruth. She was looking for a balanced ledger. But she believed that every number stood for something real. And she followed the one number that didn't a fake girl named Ada all the way down into a field 60 miles south, to the two real girls waiting underneath. The truth cannot stay buried forever, but it does not always claw its way out on its own. Sometimes it waits, patient and cold, for someone ordinary enough to notice that the count is wrong, and stubborn enough to ask why. Dana and Ruth were not brought home by a miracle, or a deathbed confession, or a face in a photograph. They were brought home by a person who refused to look away from a small, wrong number. And in the end, that refusal, quiet, unglamorous, and dogged, proved stronger than 31 years of silence. It could not bring them back, but it brought them home. Sometimes, that is the only justice the world has left to give. And it has to be enough, because it is what love looks like when it arrives too late to save anyone and stays anyway, just to bring them out of the dark. Rest easy, Dana. Rest easy, Ruth. Someone finally checked the math.